Somewhere along the way, the life you built started to feel like a costume. From the outside, nothing is wrong. You have the job, the role, the routine, the version of yourself that everyone recognizes and relies on. You show up, you do what is expected of you. And still, some mornings, you catch your own reflection, and a strange question rises up from somewhere beneath you. Who is that? Who is the person wearing my face and living my life? Because it does not quite feel like yours anymore. It feels like something you put on a long time ago just to get through, and then forgot how to take off. And lately it has been getting worse, not better. A quiet heaviness follows you through ordinary days. A sense that you are performing a part you have played so long that you can no longer find the person underneath it. You lie awake at night, tired in a way that sleep does not touch, and you begin to wonder, privately, if something has gone wrong with you. Nothing has gone wrong with you. What you are feeling is not a breakdown. It is a death and a birth happening at the very same time, in the same body. And no one ever warned you that from the inside, the two would feel almost identical. Carl Jung had a name for what is happening to you. He said the ego, the self you have been living as, clings to what is familiar long after it has quietly become a cage. And that when your soul grows past the shape it was living in, the old self has to die to make room for the one that is trying to be born. He did not soften it. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, he wrote. What you are walking through right now is exactly that pain. It is not the end of you. It is the labor of becoming you. And I know how strange it is to be told that this is a birth, when everything inside you insists it is only a loss. That is the particular cruelty of this passage. A death and a birth feel almost identical from the inside, because both of them ask you to let go of something you were gripping and to step, empty-handed, into something you cannot yet see. The people around you cannot help, because to them nothing is visibly wrong. Your life still works, your responsibilities still get met, and so you begin to suspect that you are the problem. That you should be grateful, that you should simply pull yourself together and go back to being who you were. But that is the one thing you cannot do. The door back to the old self has quietly closed behind you, and no amount of effort will open it again. The old you served you well, and it is not coming back, and mourning that is not weakness. It is the truthful beginning of everything that comes after. The only way now is forward, through the storm, toward the person waiting on the far side of it. So over the next hour, I want to name 7 signs that your old self is already dying, and that a new one is already being born, often long before you have any words for it. Some of these are going to describe your life so precisely that it may be uncomfortable to hear. And the 7th is the one almost no one recognizes while it is happening, because it does not feel like an arrival at all. It feels like the quietest thing in the world. So stay with me all the way to the end. Because if even one of these is true for you tonight, then understand this before we begin. You are not losing yourself. You are finally, after all these years, on your way back to yourself. The first sign is this. The life that used to fit you starts to feel like a costume you can no longer take off. For years, it fit perfectly. The role, the identity, the way people saw you. You were the strong one, or the responsible one, or the successful one, or the one who always held everything together. And there was a time when that felt like simply being yourself. You slipped into it without thinking, the way you slip into your own name. But somewhere in the last while, a gap has opened. You go on saying the same lines, doing the same things, being the same person for everyone who expects it. And the whole time, a part of you stands slightly outside it now, watching, aware that this is a performance in a way it never used to be. You feel it in the smallest moments. You hear yourself give the cheerful answer, the competent answer, the agreeable answer, and some quiet witness inside you thinks, "That is not what I actually feel." You keep the smile on through the meeting, the dinner, the phone call, and the effort of holding it is suddenly visible to you, like stage lighting you had never noticed before. The mask has not changed. What has changed is that you can finally see it as a mask. And once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. Carl Jung called this the persona. It is the social face each of us builds to move through the world. The polished, acceptable version we hand to others so that life runs smoothly. And Jung was careful to say the persona is not a bad thing. It is necessary. A person with no persona at all could not hold a job, or keep the peace, or function among other people for a single day. The trouble begins only when you forget it is a mask, when you mistake the role for the whole of who you are. Because a mask worn long enough stops feeling like something you are wearing and starts feeling like your actual face. Until the day the soul underneath it grows too large for the costume, and the costume begins to crack. That cracking is what you are feeling. The exhaustion of holding a role that no longer has room for everything you have become. And here is the part that matters. The discomfort is not a sign that you are failing at your life. It is a sign that you have outgrown a version of it. The costume is not getting heavier because you are getting weaker. It is getting heavier because you are getting bigger. Something real in you is pressing against the seams of who you were told to be, and it will not stop pressing because it is finally ready to be seen. You do not have to tear the whole thing off tonight. You only have to notice that it is a costume and that you are the one inside it, watching. Because the moment you can see the mask, you have already stopped being only the mask. And that quiet act of seeing is where the old self first begins, very gently, to die. There is a particular loneliness that comes with this seeing, because everyone around you is still relating to the costume. They call you by the old role, they lean on the old strengths, they expect the old answers, and they have no idea that the person inside has quietly moved. You become an actor who has forgotten why the play matters, still hitting every mark, still saying every line, while some part of you watches from the wings and aches. And you cannot even blame them for not noticing. You have been so convincing for so long that the mask is the only face they have ever known. Sometimes you look at your own life the way you would look at a room decorated by a stranger. It is tasteful, it is impressive, it simply does not feel like yours. The house, the title, the carefully chosen opinions, the way you laugh at the things you are supposed to laugh at, all of it fits the role, and none of it quite reaches the one underneath. If you have started to feel like a guest in your own life, do not be frightened by it. That feeling is not madness, and it is not ingratitude for everything you have. It is the beginning of honesty. You are seeing, perhaps for the very first time, the difference between the life you built in order to be accepted and the life that would actually be yours. And you cannot build the second one until you have admitted, without shame, that the first one had become a costume. The old self dies a little the moment you stop defending the costume as if it were your skin. This is not betrayal of the life you made. It is the first loyalty you have shown, in a very long time, to the one who has to live it. But a costume you can still feel is one thing. What comes next is stranger, because it takes something you used to be sure of and quietly empties it out from the inside. The second sign is a kind of numbness where your wanting used to be. The things that once lit you up go quiet, one by one, and you cannot make yourself care the way you used to. Think of what used to move you, the goal you chased, the praise that used to land, the plans that used to pull you out of bed in the morning, the milestones you were certain would finally make you feel like you had arrived. For years, those wants were an engine. Even on the hard days, The wanting itself carried you forward, and now you reach for it, and the engine will not turn over. You look at the thing you spent years pursuing, and where the hunger used to be, there is just a flat, quiet nothing. Not sadness, exactly. Not even boredom. Something stranger and more unsettling than either. The most frightening version of this is when you actually got the thing. You reached the goal, the real one, the one you promised yourself for 20 years. And you stood inside the achievement you had bled for and waited to feel what you were supposed to feel, and it did not come. A hollow silence where the triumph should have been. And you could not say a word of it to anyone because they were all congratulating you. And how do you explain that the summit you finally reached felt like an empty room? Consider Leo Tolstoy. By his 50s, he had written some of the greatest novels the world had ever seen. He had wealth, fame, a family, an estate, every marker of a life fully arrived. And he fell into a despair so total that he could barely go on. Everything he had built, every value he had lived by, suddenly lost its color and its meaning. To the world, it looked like a breakdown in a man who had everything. But it was not the end of his life. It was the ego of the great author, growing too small for the man he was becoming underneath it. That collapse forced him deeper than his success ever had, and out of it came the spiritual and philosophical work that shaped the rest of his life. His genius did not fail him. The old version of him simply had to go quiet so the real one could speak. Carl Jung understood this exactly. The goals that go numb were very often never fully yours to begin with. So many of them were inherited, handed to you by your family, your culture, the people whose approval you were quietly organizing your whole life to win. They were the ego's goals, the work of the first half of life. Build a self, secure a place, prove that you are enough. And Jung saw that there comes a turning point, somewhere in the middle of a life, when that first work is finished, whether you feel finished or not, and the psyche simply stops taking orders from the part of you that only ever wanted to be seen as enough. So the numbness is not depression, though it can look like its cousin. It is a withdrawal of energy from a life that has served its purpose, so that the energy can be spent on something truer. It feels like loss because something really is dying. But what is dying is only the borrowed wanting. And underneath the silence it leaves behind, if you can bear to sit in that silence long enough, a different and far more honest question is waiting to be asked. Not what do I want to have, but who am I actually for? You may try to force the old wanting back to life, out of fear of the emptiness. You may chase a new version of the same goal, hoping the engine will catch, and it will sputter and die, because it has run out of the fuel it was always secretly running on, which was other people's eyes. When you stop needing to be seen, the wanting built on being seen cannot survive. So you sit in the strange quiet of a life with no next prize lit up on the horizon, and you wait, and slowly, in a whisper and not a roar, the true wanting begins to speak. And there is a specific loneliness in this one, because from the outside it can look like ingratitude. You have the life people are supposed to want, and you stand in the middle of it and feel a quiet, guilty emptiness, and you cannot say a word of it to anyone, because who are you to feel hollow inside a life this fortunate? So you smile, and you count your blessings out loud, and you privately wonder what is wrong with you that none of it is enough. But nothing is wrong with you. You have simply reached the edge of the map that the first half of your life was drawing, the map made of getting and proving and arriving, and discovered a whole territory beyond it that the old instructions cannot help you cross. The emptiness is not the absence of a good life. It is the presence of a deeper hunger that the old life was never built to feed. So, do not mistake this numbness for a sign that you have ruined something, or that you are ungrateful or broken. The dimming of the old desires is not a malfunction, it is a homing signal. It is the psyche pulling its energy back from everything that was borrowed, so that it has something left to spend on what is true. What feels like the death of your motivation is really the death of a motivation that was never fully yours. And in the quiet it leaves behind, the real one is beginning, very slowly, to stir. You are not losing the will to live. You are losing the will to keep performing a life. Those are not the same thing, though at first they feel identical. But the old self does not die quietly just because its goals have gone cold. It has deeper roots than that. And the next sign is the moment you discover just how deep they go. The third sign is the most frustrating of all. You try to change, sincerely and with everything you have, and the same old patterns drag you straight back. How many times have you promised yourself that this time would be different? That you would not lose your temper again, that you would not let a few careless words wound you the way they always do, that you would stop choosing the same kind of person who has hurt you before. And then a familiar situation arrives, and before you have even decided anything, the old reaction has already fired, and every promise dissolves. Afterward, you blame yourself. You decide you must be weak, or undisciplined, or simply broken in some way other people are not. Carl Jung saw it completely differently. He did not believe people fail to change because their willpower is weak. He believed that willpower simply arrives too late. By the time your conscious mind decides to do something new, the old program buried in the unconscious has already run. Picture an ordinary moment. You are in a meeting, and someone suggests, gently and without any cruelty, that your work could be improved in a small way. The room is calm, their voice is kind, nothing harsh is said. And yet your chest tightens, and a wave of something floods up through you, and an inner voice announces with total certainty, "They think I am not good enough." That night you lie awake and replay the moment again and again. And what is tormenting you is not the mild remark from that afternoon. It is a much older wound that the remark happened to touch. Jung called these buried emotional wounds complexes. A complex forms from an experience that was never fully felt and never fully healed. It sinks quietly into the unconscious, and it does not disappear. It waits, like a seed under the ground, for the right conditions to sprout. A tone of voice, a glance, a silence, and suddenly the one reacting is no longer the capable adult you are today. It is the wounded, younger part of you that was hurt long ago and has been waiting underground ever since. Until you make the unconscious conscious, Jung wrote, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And that is the trap. Watch a life for long enough and a pattern appears that is almost eerie. The same kind of person, chosen again and again, the same fears, the same failures, in slightly different clothes. The scenery changes, the people change, and yet the inner script runs on unchanged, as if someone keeps replaying the same film. Imagine a woman who was, as a child, only ever praised for her achievements, and never simply held. She grows into someone who cannot rest, who must always be excelling, and no amount of success ever quiets the fear underneath that she is not, in herself, enough. She does not have a discipline problem. She is running a program that was written into her before she could read. The reason this belongs on a list of signs that the old self is dying is subtle, so stay with it. The patterns feel most inescapable right at the point when they are about to lose their grip. Because for years you did not even see them. They were simply who you are, and you gave them an elegant name. You said, "That is just how I am." And that little sentence is the strongest wall there is against any real change. Because once you believe a reaction is your unchangeable nature, you stop questioning it at all. So the very fact that the patterns now torment you, that you can see them repeating and it bothers you, is not a sign of failure. It is the first crack of awareness. You are beginning to watch the program instead of simply being run by it. And a pattern you can watch has already begun to lose its power over you. And notice the most dangerous thing the old self does with these patterns. It names them. It calls them your personality. You say, "That is just how I am. I have always been anxious. I have always been the jealous type. I have always shut down when things get hard." And the moment a reaction is filed under who you are, it becomes almost impossible to question, because questioning it would feel like questioning your own existence. This is how the old self hides in plain sight. It stops being something you do and disguises itself as something you are. And so, for years, you defend the very prison that confines you, mistaking the bars for your own bones. But watch what is actually happening the moment these patterns start to bother you. For most of your life they did not. They simply ran, silently, and you called the results fate. The fact that you can now see the loop, that you feel the gap between the reaction and the person you want to be, that it troubles you rather than simply happening through you, is not a sign that you are stuck. It is the first light getting in. You are beginning to stand a small distance from the pattern instead of being swallowed by it. And that small distance is everything. A complex you can watch has already begun to loosen. A reaction you can name as a reaction, rather than as your nature, has already started to lose its grip. The old self does not die when you defeat these patterns by force. It dies the day you stop believing they are you. Once you start to see the old script for what it is, you reach a strange and painful discovery that you cannot build a genuinely new life while still looking through the old eyes, which is the fourth sign, and the one that turns everything upside down. The fourth sign is a deadlock that makes no sense until you understand what is really happening. You change everything on the outside and end up in exactly the same place. You take the new job, you leave the relationship, or enter a new one. You move to a different city, hoping for a genuine fresh start, and for a little while it feels different. Then, slowly, the same pressures return, the same conflicts, wearing new faces, the same emptiness in a new location, and the ego does what the ego always does. It blames the circumstances, the other people, the bad luck. But the deadlock did not come from the outside at all. It came because you were trying to build a new future while still perceiving it through a lens that has long outlived its purpose. Carl Jung described a principle for exactly this moment, one of his most important. He called it enantiodromia. He observed that when a way of thinking, a belief, a whole mode of living is held rigidly for too long, the energy of the unconscious eventually reverses on it. This is not random misfortune. It is the psyche's own way of restoring balance. When your inner life has quietly expanded, but your conscious mind stubbornly clings to the old habits, the unconscious begins generating crises and repeated failures for one reason only: to break the outdated structure open. It is sounding an alarm. It is telling you that the mental framework you are using can no longer contain the size of the life that is waiting to be lived. Think of it like trying to navigate a huge modern city using the hand-drawn map of the small village you grew up in. That map was accurate once. It may have kept you safe for years, but now it is useless, and worse than useless, because you trust it. If you keep meeting every new experience with the same old fear of being hurt, the same reflex to guard yourself, the same braced expectation that it will go wrong, then every new opportunity simply gets arranged into the old pattern. Your way of thinking becomes a kind of magnet, quietly pulling each new person and each new chance back into the orbit of the past. And so you conclude, wrongly, that nothing ever really changes. Consider a man who believed that rigid discipline was the secret to everything. Every hour of his day was planned. It made him successful in his work, and he was proud of it, and rightly so. But then he married and became a father, and he tried to run a home and a marriage the same way he ran his projects. He scheduled everything. He grew frustrated whenever the messy reality of a family disrupted his plans. And slowly the warmth drained out of his home, until one night, after another cold argument, he found himself standing alone in a quiet house, understanding at last that the very discipline that had built his success had dismantled his happiness. The tool that had saved him in one chapter had become the thing destroying him in the next. He did not need a new schedule. He needed a new way of seeing. You have probably run your own version of this experiment without ever calling it one. The fresh start that turned out to be the same story in a new setting. The new relationship that slowly began to feel like the last one. The move to a different city that solved nothing, because the one thing you could not leave behind was the lens you packed inside your own eyes. People call it bad luck. They say they keep attracting the same kind of person, keep landing in the same kind of trouble, as though the world were conspiring against them. But the world is not conspiring. The unconscious is simply faithful. It keeps handing you the same lesson, in a new disguise each time, and it will go on handing it to you until you stop trying to solve it on the outside and turn, finally, to the way of seeing that keeps generating it. The circumstances were never the real problem. They were the messenger, and the message does not stop arriving until it has been received. We cannot change anything, Jung wrote, until we accept it. As long as you insist that the old map is still correct, that your old methods and old assumptions are still right, you stay locked inside the same failures, and you call it the world's fault. The turning point does not come when you finally rearrange the circumstances. It comes the moment you stop fighting the outer situation and turn, instead, to change the lens through which you are seeing it. When you find the courage to admit that your old way of understanding the world has fulfilled its purpose and reached its end, and you let yourself sit in the discomfort of not knowing, of learning to see from the beginning again, then the old self loses the very ground it was standing on. And this is the sign people resist the longest, because surrendering the old way of seeing feels like surrendering your grip on reality itself. The old lens was not just a set of opinions. It was how you knew which way was up. It told you who to trust, and what to fear, and how the story was going to go. To admit it has expired is to stand, for a while, with no map at all, in the open, not knowing. And the ego would rather be miserable inside a familiar structure than free inside an unfamiliar one. So, it clings. It insists the old map is still right, and the territory is simply behaving badly. It would sooner blame the whole world than update a single belief. But consider what it costs to keep the old lens. Every new person gets filtered through the old suspicion. Every new chance gets measured against the old fear. Every fresh start gets quietly bent back into the shape of the last ending, until you are convinced that nothing ever really changes, when the truth is that only you have refused to. So if your life keeps delivering you the same lesson in different disguises, do not read it as proof that you are cursed. Read it as the unconscious knocking louder, because you did not answer the first time. The repeated failure is not punishment. It is an invitation you have been declining. And the moment you finally accept it, the moment you say, perhaps the way I have been seeing this is the thing that has to die, the whole deadlock begins to break, and the energy that was trapped in the old pattern comes home to build something new. That is real death, and it is disorienting, because for a while you have surrendered the old eyes and not yet grown the new ones. And it is precisely there, in that raw in-between place, that the next sign arrives, the one that hurts the most and heals the most. The fifth sign is the one that breaks people open, because it is grief, and it is grief with no name and no funeral. You begin to mourn a person who has not died. You begin to grieve the person you used to be. No one prepares you for this. We understand how to grieve the dead. There are rituals for it, and people who lower their voices, and a shape to pour the sorrow into. But there is no ceremony for the quiet death of a former self. And that is exactly what is happening inside you. Somewhere in this passage you catch a glimpse of an old photograph, or a song from a certain year finds you unprepared, and you are ambushed by a wave of grief for someone you are never going to be again. Someone lighter. Someone who still believed the things you no longer believe, who still wanted the things you no longer want, who could still walk into a room full of people and belong there without a second thought. That person was real. You lived as them for decades, and they are gone now, as surely as if they had died, except that you are still here, standing, breathing, wearing their face and answering to their name, and you mourn them alone. You cannot fully explain to anyone what you have lost, because from the outside nothing is missing. You still go to work, you still love your people, you still smile in the familiar conversations, but privately you are attending a funeral that only you can see. The funeral of the innocence, the certainty, the easy belonging that used to be yours. You grieve the version of you that could believe in the plan, that trusted the map, that felt at home inside the costume. And you begin to wonder if there is something wrong with you for mourning a self you supposedly wanted to grow out of. There is nothing wrong with you. To grieve who you were is the surest possible proof that you have actually traveled somewhere. Only a person who has genuinely changed has an old self to mourn. The tears are not a sign that you have lost your way. They are the receipt for the distance you have come. And it is not only a past self you grieve. Sometimes it is a future. For years you carried a picture of how your life was going to turn out, the way it would all come together, the person you would grow old beside, the shape the whole thing would finally take. That picture kept you company through a great many hard days. And somewhere in this dying, you quietly set it down and understood it was not going to happen the way you had imagined. Not because anything failed, but because you have become someone who wants a different life than the one that picture was ever drawn for. And so you grieve a future that is not coming, a life you never even got to live, and there is no one to tell, because it existed nowhere but in your own hopes. Carl Jung knew that real growth always costs us something, and that the cost is very often paid in exactly this currency, the quiet loss of who we were. He did not pretend the dying was painless. He only insisted it was the price of becoming real, because here is what the grief is actually doing, underneath the pain of it. To mourn the old self is to loosen your grip on it, finger by finger. As long as your hands stay closed around who you used to be, they are too full to receive who you are becoming. The grief hurts because it is doing something necessary. It is opening you. It is clearing the room. So if you are grieving a version of yourself right now, do not rush to bury them, and do not be ashamed of the tears. Thank them, if you can. They carried you this far. They were not a mistake. They were a chapter, and a chapter has to end for the story to go on. Let the old self be mourned the way anything beloved deserves to be mourned. And there is another face to this grief that catches people off guard. You do not only mourn who you were, you begin to mourn people who are still right in front of you. Because as your old self dies, some of the bonds that were built on that old self begin, very quietly, to thin. You sit across from someone you have known for 20 years, someone who has done nothing wrong, and you feel a distance opening that you cannot explain and cannot close. They are still there. They still know your coffee order and the sound of your laugh. But you have changed in the dark, and you can feel that you are becoming someone they will not be able to follow. And there is no words for that loss, and no funeral for it. So you carry it alone, passing the salt, asking about their week. This is the loneliest stretch of the whole passage, and it is worth saying plainly why it hurts so much. Grief is meant to be shared. And this grief cannot be. You cannot post it. You cannot explain it to the person themselves without wounding them for no reason. You can barely explain it to yourself. So you hold it quietly, and you wonder if you have become cold, or ungrateful, or somehow broken. You are none of those things. You are simply awake to a truth most people arrange their whole lives never to feel. That love and distance can live in the same room, at the same table, in the same marriage. That you can hold deep tenderness for someone and still grieve that you can no longer fully reach them. It does not mean you love them less. It means you have grown to a place they have not yet traveled to, and growing has always, in every life that ever grew, cost exactly this. Because it is only on the far side of this grief, when the weeping has done its slow work, that you begin to notice something you had missed in all the noise of the dying. A sound underneath the sorrow, a voice you have not heard in years, or maybe ever, and it is speaking. The sixth sign is the first sign of the birth, and it is so quiet that most people miss it entirely. Underneath the grief and the emptiness, a different voice begins to speak. It does not announce itself. It is not loud or certain the way the old self was loud and certain. It comes in the stillness you have started to protect, in the solitude you no longer fear, in the strange spaciousness left behind once the old goals have gone quiet, and the old patterns have loosened their grip. When the noise of who you were supposed to be finally dies down, you begin to hear something that was always underneath it, patiently waiting. Carl Jung believed this was the whole point of the descent, that the emptiness left by the dying ego is not a void to be filled as quickly as possible, but the only truly fertile ground on which the authentic self can finally be heard. And it asks a single, quiet, revolutionary question. Who am I when I no longer have to live to please the world? Who am I underneath the performance, the role, the map, the mask? For most of your life, you were too busy surviving and achieving and belonging to ever seriously ask it. And now, in the quiet after the dying, it will not leave you alone. That is not a symptom of something breaking. That is the sound of something being born. Consider Hermann Hesse. Before he became one of the most beloved writers of the 20th century, before the Nobel Prize, he was crushed almost to nothing by an existential crisis. The weight of his family's expectations and the polished public image of the promising young author had become a cage around the sensitive, searching soul underneath. He sought out depth psychology in his desperation, and only when he allowed the old identities to collapse, the good son, the writer performing for the public, did he finally reach the deeper well within himself. The death of his former self did not destroy him. It liberated the truest Hesse, the one who went on to write the works that have spoken to searching souls ever since. The old identity had to die so the real voice could be heard. This is the pattern, again and again. What looks like a person falling apart is very often a person falling, at last, together. You will notice the new voice most clearly in the things that suddenly matter for no reason you can defend. A pull toward work you were never trained for. A longing for a simpler life that makes no sense on paper. A quiet certainty that you are meant to create something, or help someone, or go somewhere, that you could not justify to a single practical person in your life. The old self measured everything by whether it would impress, or pay, or secure your place in the eyes of others. The new voice does not think in those terms at all. It only knows what is true for you, and it says it plainly, and it will not raise its volume to compete with your fear. That is how you learn to tell the two apart. The old self argues and bargains and lists all the reasons. The new self simply, quietly, knows. And the first few times you follow it, even in something small, you feel a sensation you may not have felt in years. The strange, steadying feeling of being on your own side. Of moving, for once, in a direction that is genuinely yours. It is faint at first and easy to lose again. But every time you honor it, it grows a little clearer, and the old self grows a little quieter, until one day you realize the voice you were straining to hear has become the voice you think in. Jung compared this emerging self to a rough gemstone being cleaned of the mud that has covered it for decades. That layer of earth once protected the stone from the harshness of the world, but it also hid the light that had always been inside it. And most people, out of fear, cling to the mud. They keep the old protective shell and settle for a life that is gray and smaller than they are, and quietly disconnected from their own soul, because the shell feels safe. To let the old self die is nothing more and nothing less than the slow washing away of everything that was never really you, until what was always underneath can finally give off its own light. You will not recognize this new voice by its confidence, because at first it has none. You will recognize it by its honesty. It is the voice that tells you the truth you have been avoiding. It is the small, clear preference that has nothing to do with what would impress anyone. It is the thing you find yourself drawn to for no reason you can justify. It is quieter than the old ambitions, and infinitely more yours. And the more you turn toward it, the more it speaks. This is not a new person being manufactured. It is the person who was always there, buried under the costume, finally being given the room to step forward into the light. And you will be tempted, at first, not to trust it. The new voice is so quiet and so unlike the loud certainties of the old self that your first instinct is to dismiss it as a whim or foolishness or a midlife indulgence you cannot afford. The old self will try to talk you out of it, because the old self is fighting for its life, and the last thing it wants is for you to start taking this faint new signal seriously. So you second-guess the pull toward the different work, the different life, the different way of being. You call it impractical. You tell yourself it is too late. And every time you do that, the voice goes quiet again, not because it was wrong, but because it will not compete. It only speaks in the stillness, and only to someone willing to listen without arguing. So the practice of this stage is simple and hard. Protect the quiet. Guard the solitude, where the voice can be heard. Stop drowning it out with noise and busyness and the endless opinions of everyone who still relates to your old self. And when the small, true preference surfaces, the one that has nothing to do with impressing anyone, do not rush to dismiss it. Follow it, even a little, because that is how the new self grows. Not through one dramatic reinvention, but through 1,000 small acts of trusting the honest voice over the impressive one. The birth is not a single moment. It is a slow accumulation of times you chose what was real over what was expected. And each of those choices is the old self dying and the new self taking one more breath. But hearing the voice is not the same as living from it. There is one more threshold, and the 7th sign is the one that changes everything. The moment the new self stops being something you hear and becomes something you are. The 7th sign is the quietest of all, and almost no one recognizes it while it is happening, because it does not feel like an arrival. It feels like a letting go. You stop performing, and something real steps forward to take the place the performance used to hold. It does not come as a grand declaration. You do not stand up one day and announce a new and difficult version of yourself to a room that never asked. It is far smaller and far stronger than that. You simply stop leaving yourself. When the true answer rises in you, you let it be spoken, gently, without a paragraph of apology stapled to it. When something is wrong, you stop performing that it is fine to spare everyone the discomfort. When you need to go, you go. When the answer is no, you let it be no. You stay loyal to yourself in the small, ordinary moments where you used to abandon yourself on instinct. And slowly, one honest moment at a time, That loyalty becomes the ground you stand on. Some people will call it cold, the ones who preferred the old you, the one who always said yes, who always bent, who always made room by folding herself smaller. They may mistake your honesty for a loss of warmth, but it does not come from a closed heart. It comes from a heart that has finally decided to include you in its care. This is not the end of loving people. It is the end of loving them by disappearing. Carl Jung called this long process individuation, the becoming of the one you were always meant to be. And he was clear about what it actually requires, and it is not what people expect. It does not mean becoming flawless, or spiritual, or endlessly positive, or better than everyone else. It means becoming whole. It means integrating both the light and the shadow, both your gifts and your deepest wounds, into one honest human being. The parts of yourself you spent a lifetime hiding, the anger you were ashamed of, the need you thought was weakness, the darkness you kept in the basement so that people would keep loving the mask, all of it is invited home. You stop the long war of self-punishment. You stop trying to be only the acceptable half of yourself. And in place of that war, a strange and unfamiliar peace begins to settle. A steadiness that does not depend on anyone's approval, because it is no longer built on being seen a certain way. The most terrifying thing, Jung said, is to accept oneself completely, and also the most freeing, because once you are no longer running on the old operating system of fear, once you no longer have to perform a part in everyone else's play, you begin to move through your life with a quiet steadiness that no outer storm can fully shake. You become, at last, both the author and the main character of your own story, instead of a supporting actor in everyone else's. And you may wonder what this reborn self actually looks like, because it is far more ordinary than the word rebirth suggests. It does not look like a person who has transcended their problems. It looks like a person who has stopped abandoning themselves inside them. It is choosing the honest, slightly disappointing answer over the dishonest, pleasing one. It is letting a silence sit instead of rushing to fill it with reassurance. It is leaving when you are ready to leave. It is telling someone, gently, that what they said hurt, instead of swallowing it and adding it to the pile. None of it looks dramatic from the outside. No one throws you a celebration for it. But each small act of not leaving yourself is a brick, and slowly, without a single day you could point to, you look up and find you are standing on a foundation you built out of your own honesty. And the strangest part is how quiet the arrival is. You keep waiting for a fanfare, a finish line, a moment when someone confirms that you have finally become yourself. It never comes, because there is no one left to confirm it. You stop needing them to. That is the whole point. The new self does not announce itself, because it no longer performs for an audience. It simply lives, a little more truthfully each day, in a peace so unspectacular that you might almost miss it. And that peace, that quiet steadiness underneath your ordinary life, is the thing the old self spent decades chasing in all the wrong places and could never once buy or earn or perform its way into. It was only ever available on the other side of the dying, and when you look back from here, you will finally see the whole shape of it. Every one of these signs, laid end to end, looked like a list of losses. The costume that stopped fitting, the wanting that went numb, the patterns, the old eyes, the grief. If you only counted what was leaving, you would think this dying was the saddest thing that could happen to a person. But every single one of those departures was clearing the same patch of ground, the ground where a real self could finally stand, upright and unhidden, without a mask and without apology. Nothing was taken from you that was ever truly yours. What left was only everything that stood between you and your own life. And what remains, when all of it has fallen away, is not less. It is the first thing in your whole existence that was ever completely, unmistakably real. So, how do you actually help the old self die? Not by hating it, not by forcing it out through sheer willpower. Depth psychology is clear on this. Whatever you suppress, whatever you try to destroy, only returns with more force and finds subtler ways to control your life. Your old self is not an enemy to be punished. It is a frightened part of you that has been trying, in the only way it ever knew, to keep you safe. It can only truly let go once it has been understood, thanked, and released. Carl Jung left behind a practice for exactly this, one of the most powerful things he ever gave us. He called it active imagination, a direct and honest dialogue between the person you are now and the deeper parts of yourself. And you can do a simple form of it whenever an old pattern erupts. The next time the old reaction fires, the flash of anger at a small criticism, the wave of fear before an opportunity, the urge to run and hide, do not let it sweep you away. Instead, stop. Find a quiet place. Close your eyes and turn your attention to wherever in your body the feeling is strongest. Now, gently, give that feeling a form. Imagine it as a figure standing before you. It may appear as a frightened child. It may be a scarred and exhausted soldier still in his armor. It may be a lonely, angry shape in the dark. Whatever comes, let it take shape, and then speak to it the way you would speak to a wounded friend, not with judgment, but with patience and real tenderness. Ask it the honest questions. What are you trying to protect me from? How long have you been carrying this? Are you tired of holding it all these years? And then, this is the important part. Actually listen for what rises up in answer. What you will very often find astonishes people. Beneath the anger, beneath the need for control, beneath the fear, there was never any malice. There was only a wound that never healed. A younger version of you who was forced to play the villain because it was the only way it knew to keep you from being hurt again. And when that understanding finally moves through you, something in the old defense lets go. Then you can complete it. Standing as the person you are today, look at that figure and offer it both your gratitude and its freedom. Say to it, truly, thank you for protecting me through all those years. But I have grown now. I am safe. I can carry my own life from here. Your task is finished, and finished with honor. You are allowed to rest. When those words come from a place of real reconciliation, and not from a wish to get rid of the feeling, you may sense that figure soften and grow quiet and slowly dissolve, its energy flowing gently back into you. This is not a trick, and it is not a single afternoon's work. It is a practice, returned to again and again. But each time you do it, you are doing the actual labor of this whole passage. You are letting the old self lay its burden down. You are not killing it, you are releasing it. And in the silence that follows each of these dialogues, there is no emptiness left behind, only room. Room for the one who was always underneath to finally live. Let me give you a picture of how this can go, so it does not stay abstract. Imagine the pattern that keeps ambushing you is a sudden, disproportionate anger that rises whenever you feel unseen. You sit with it, and you ask it to take a form. And what appears is not a monster at all. It is a small child, arms crossed, jaw set, refusing to cry. And you ask it, gently, what are you protecting me from? And the answer that rises, quietly, is this: if I let them see that it hurts, they win, and I disappear. And suddenly you understand. That anger was never cruelty. It was a child's last defense against being erased. It kept a small, unseen person from vanishing completely. And when you can finally see that, the anger stops being an enemy to crush and becomes a wound to hold. You thank it. You tell the child that you see them now, that they do not have to stand guard any longer, that you are here, and you are safe, and you will not let them disappear. And something that has been clenched inside you for 30 years, very slowly, begins to unclench. Do not expect it to finish in a single sitting. This is not a trick that resolves a lifetime in an afternoon. It is a practice, returned to again and again, each time an old pattern erupts. Some days the figure will not speak. Some days you will be too swept up in the emotion to step back at all, and you will only realize afterward that the old program ran again. That is not failure. Noticing it afterward is itself progress, because a year ago you would not have noticed at all. Every single time you manage to turn toward the old self with curiosity instead of war, you weaken its grip a little more. You are not trying to win a battle. You are slowly, patiently, giving an exhausted part of you permission to finally lay its weapons down. And that permission, offered again and again, is what actually lets the old self die in peace instead of dying in a fight. So if you have recognized yourself anywhere in these 7 signs, let this be the thing you carry with you tonight. What is happening to you is not a breakdown, and it is not the end. The exhaustion, the numbness, the grief, the strange loss of the person you used to be, it is not your life falling apart. It is your old self dying, and it has to die, because it has already given you everything it had to give, and it cannot carry you any further. And on the far side of that dying, quieter than you expected and more real than anything the old self ever built, a new you is being born. And that new self does not arrive fully formed, announced by trumpets. It arrives the way dawn arrives, so gradually that you cannot name the moment the dark became light. One day you simply notice you are no longer bracing. You notice you said the true thing, and the sky did not fall. You notice a small, steady warmth underneath your ordinary life that was not there before, and does not need anyone's approval to stay. That is the new self, already here, already breathing. You did not have to become someone else to find it. You only had to let go of everyone you were pretending to be. You do not have to force it. You could not force it even if you tried. A birth has its own timing, and so does this one. Your only task is to stop fighting the death, to stop trying to resurrect the costume, and to let yourself be carried through the storm to the other side. Be gentle with the person you are becoming. Give yourself the same patience you would give a dear friend walking through something this hard, because that is exactly what is happening, and you would never rush a friend through it, or tell them to hurry up and be fine. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to grieve what you are leaving, even as you walk toward what is real. And if the loneliness of it frightens you, hear this before you go. What you are in is a passage, not a permanent address. It feels endless, the way the middle of the night feels endless, as though the light is simply never going to come back. But you are not lost. You are in transit. The distance you feel from the people around you, the strangeness of your own life, the grief that has no funeral, these are the conditions of the crossing, not the shape of your future. On the other side of this are people who will know the real you, because you will finally be showing them the real you. Connections that do not ask you to disappear in order to keep them. A life that actually fits, because you will have built it from the inside out instead of the outside in. You cannot see any of that yet from where you are standing, in the dark, in the middle of the passage. But it is there, and it is real, and it is closer than it feels. And the only way to reach it is the way you are already going, straight through. And if you feel this dying and this birth happening in your own life right now, do not carry it in silence. Leave one word in the comments below. Not a whole story, unless you want to tell one. Just one word for where you are tonight. It might be dying. It might be emptiness. It might be born. It might simply be tired. whatever is truest for you, however small it seems, because every word left there is a quiet reminder that none of us is walking this alone, that there are more of us in this passage than any of us can see, each one convinced they are the only one. And if these words reach something real in you, then stay close, subscribe, and walk the rest of this with us, one quiet truth at a time. This is a channel for exactly this. The long, lonely, sacred work of letting the old self die and becoming who you were always meant to be. And do not measure your progress by how good you feel on any given day. Some days this will feel like freedom, and some days it will feel like falling, and both of those days are the same work. The dying is not linear. You will believe you have finally let the old self go, and then find it back in the driver's seat on a hard morning, and conclude you have made no progress at all. You have. Growth in the psyche does not run in a straight line. It circles, it doubles back, it returns to the same wound at a deeper level than before. So trust the direction, not the daily weather. As long as you keep turning toward what is honest, even when it costs you, even when you do it clumsily, you are moving. The old self is dying at exactly the pace it can bear to die. And the new one is being born at exactly the pace it can bear to be born. You do not have to rush either of them. You only have to keep walking. Take care of yourself. Be gentle with who you are becoming. And whenever the passage gets dark and long, come back and sit here again, because there will always be another truth waiting for you here, on the nights you need somewhere to bring the weight. I will see you in the next one.